Welcome, everybody. We are going to spend some time today talking about PQLs, EQLs, milestones, product data, really thinking about kind of how to optimize your sales and workflow around product-led growth. So just as far as a agenda for today, what we're going to be running through here is I am going to quickly introduce us to milestones. I'm going to talk about what they are, how we think about them, how we think you should think about them. And then I'm going to take you through just a couple examples. I'm hoping this part of the presentation is going to be pretty short because ultimately what we want to get to is the conversation with Jean from Alma. Jean is the Chief Customer Officer there and has a lot of really interesting things to say about milestones. And she's helped me think about how we're approaching milestones, and I think is going to be a huge help to all of you. So let me just dive in, get us started, get us grounded in some of the kind of basic ideas of milestones, and we'll take it from there. So just, what is a milestone? Fundamentally, they're just a way to track the activity of a contact or an account. So, what you are doing with your product, if you've instrumented it, is you're looking at what all of the different actions someone's taken. And ultimately, as a product-led growth company, it's really critical to understand what those actions are and how they relate to who's qualified, what stage of the process they're in, who might be able to be expanded, how good of a customer they are, right? The whole fundamental, I think, difference in product-led growth and everything else is that, it is a great way to qualify customers by, truly understanding whether they're a fit for your product or not. Another way to think about it, fundamentally, is a milestone is to PLG as stages are to enterprise SaaS. So, if you remember your SAT analogies, this is sort of the way to go. And I'm going to talk about some of the differences between them, but I think that's pretty simple sort of approach, right? In your enterprise SaaS world, you had a whole set of sales stages. They were pre-sales. Sometimes they extended to post-sales. Milestones, should be able to extend across the whole thing. And they are going to represent something pretty similar, which is, ultimately, what is the state of that customer? With that said, there are some important differences, and I think these are some of the advantages to taking a more milestone-based approach to thinking about sales and to thinking about marketing and product-led world. The first one is just milestones are behavioral based fundamentally, right? So, when we talk about milestones, product qualified lead, or for someone to be onboarded, it's going to be based on the behaviors that they've taken in your product, right? Even pre-sign up, you can look at behaviors like, did they give you an email address? Did they open a certain number of emails? How did they interact with your content? Typically, sales stages are going to be either sort of like gut feeling based, right? At the beginning, in the earlier stages, it's much more gut feeling. And then the later stages, it's going to tend towards, you'll have some kind of quantitative criteria. Is this company big enough? But a lot of it is what, you'll call in sales like stage gates, right? So, do I feel as though I have budget approval? Typically budget approval is not a thing that gets written down, but it's a thing that would be required to move into a certain sales stage. So, ultimately you're still sort of relying on a set of much more qualitative metrics. The second one is that, like I said, milestones really are full life cycles. So you can think about milestones starting as essentially, even before you have the email address for a customer. We use a product, for instance, that allows us to identify website visitors by their accounts. And so, that could be the beginning of their journey with us. We can look at how many visits came from that account. Once enough visits came from that account, they could move to a new milestone. But, the fundamentals, and I think what we'll focus on most here, are product-based milestones, right? So after they sign up for your product, what are all the milestones that they go through? Where this is really different than how we think about sales stages typically is that sales stages usually end at closed won. And, I think this is one of the sort of biggest challenges you have in comparing the product-led world and the enterprise SaaS world is really in product-led, the journey just begins when, they're closed won, they become users of your product, even just begins when they start to pay you, right? The ultimate opportunity is much bigger than that. And then finally, the big difference between them is that milestones are not linear in quite the same way. So you can use them linearly, and I think we'll talk about them in a kind of linear way. But fundamentally, a customer can be in multiple milestones at the same time, right? Or they could skip milestones. Whereas, when you have sales stages, they're much more sort of perfectly linear and you're only in one stage at a time. So that's kind of the underpinning for what a milestone is. Now, let's talk about kind of how do you get yourself started with milestones. I think, when we're out talking to folks who are at kind of all different stages of this journey, but, really typically, nearer to the beginning, I think there's some sort of amount of being overwhelmed by creating those milestones. And like, do you need to build one of those crazy customer journey slides that, has lines pointing out every direction? So, how do you get started with milestones? What's a good sort of rule of thumb? I like this pretty simple set of milestones as, if you wanted to put a line in the sand, if you said to me, what should my milestones be? And I wasn't allowed to ask you any questions about, how your product works, what your business is, what matters to you. What are just the sort of 6 things that you should be capturing with product data in order to understand sort of the life cycle stage that a customer is in. And so, the first one is obviously really simple. It's just signed up. So, did they sign up for your product, right? That's pretty binary. It's usually just a single, event that would denote that. The second one is, are they onboarded? And I'm going to go deeper into the difference between are they onboarded and are they a PQL or a product qualified lead, because I think there are important distinctions there. So I'll come back to that one in a few minutes. Then you need some kind of transacted milestone, right? So, typically most of you have some sort of trial or free tier. And so, somebody has to be able to move into being transacted. They become they move from being a prospect to being a customer. And then there's some steady state. Different people call this different things. Some people call it active. We'll talk about the difference between milestones and health active states as well in a little. And then finally, EQL, so expansion qualified lead, right? So, again, these don't end in product qualified world. Your, journey with your customer really just begins when they start paying you. And so that expansion qualified lead is really, really critical, because ultimately, what you want to know is can this customer become something much bigger? And should I, add additional pieces, especially kind of direct sales? So those are the kind of typical milestone stages. And then milestones themselves are ultimately made up of these kind of criteria, right? And there's kind of 4 questions you're answering within any milestone criteria. So if we took, onboarded as an example, what did they do? So what specific actions did they take in your product to be considered onboarded? Within one of those actions, is there any additional metadata you want to consider? So, the example here, if I used onboarded, one of the things for being onboarded might be that you need to invite another user, right, to be onboarded. And so within that, maybe the additional metadata would be something like, is that user, maybe it needs to be an admin in order for you to be considered onboarded. Then there's a threshold. So how many times did this need to happen? So if you only needed to invite one other user, that threshold would be 1. But it might be that to use a certain product, you need to do something 5 times in order to be onboarded. And so, that's really just allowing you to keep that threshold. And then finally, there's a time window. So for some milestones, it's really going to matter, especially if you're looking at something like active. But, for a lot of milestones, it's actually probably going to be a little less important. Because whether someone is qualified or not is usually not going to be a sort of function of time. It's usually going to be a function of their behavior in your product. But fundamentally it is there. So the second and the fourth one, but you can think about that as the kind of equation. It's action plus filter plus threshold plus time window. So to give a kind of more tangible example of that and how it works, let's just quickly talk about a PQL, so a product qualified lead. This is really a kind of a core piece of every PLG company, right? Ultimately, people come into your product. Anybody can really come in, they can sign up, whether it's a trial, it's a freemium. And the question that you're trying to answer is, have they taken the right actions in my product to be considered qualified? So, a couple things when you're thinking about what this means for you. The first one is that just and I think this is an important distinction. It's easy to confuse, are they onboarded with, are they product qualified? And I think you don't want to make that distinction. Or I think you want to be careful that you're not letting those overlap. So, what you want onboarding to be, onboarded as a milestone to be, is, have they taken the actions necessary in order to use your product, right? So for us, for instance, we have a product that requires you pull in data from different places. You can't use our product if you haven't pulled in data from someplace. And so, are you onboarded? You have to connect a data source to Variance. But that doesn't answer the question of, are you product qualified, right? So product qualified is really, have you started to capture, have you reached the aha moment, right? Have you done the things that would show you the value of the product? To that end, the way to think about it, I think, and you can play with these numbers, it's going to be different for different businesses, but the way I think about it is fundamentally, your PQLs are just going to be really, really highly likely to convert, somewhere in the 60 to 70% range. So, if someone has taken this set of actions, they should be 60 to 70% likely to convert. Not all of them will convert, but a large to of them will. And I think you want to set that bar high. You don't want your PQLs to be set too low. So, to make it sort of even more straightforward, to use a couple of products that I'm sure we're all familiar with, let's talk about kind of what would be example PQLs. And obviously, I don't know the exact numbers for these things, so I left them out. But I think they're still instructive and will help us think about it. So, first one, Slack. What are the PQLs? Again, coming back to this idea. At what point do I really understand the value of Slack? When I've seen it, really the two things that you need to do to see the value of Slack. One is you need to add team members, right? Slack alone is not a place that has a lot of value to anyone. And then you need to send messages, right? And so I would imagine if I were writing a PQL for Slack, it would probably be some combination of those two things. Say you need to invite 2 or 3 team members, and you need to send over some threshold of messages. And once you do that, you're almost definitely going to become a Slack customer. So then, if we think about Asana or any really project management system, you have something like tasks created, right? So, fundamentally, are you using the product or not? It's a task management system. And then team members added. From now, for the purposes of this, let's ignore the fact that you could use Asana alone, and let's focus on the idea that Asana is a kind of team-based tool. And then, for something like Salesforce, I remember very specifically. I had a conversation with someone who used to work for me who came from Salesforce, and one of the things he said is that the aha moment for Salesforce is when a company creates their first custom object. Right. Once you create a custom object, you put that time in, the energy in to managing Salesforce in that way. You're almost definitely going to become a sort of big customer. Maybe you have to invite team members as well. But the point is, again, have you sort of shown that value? Have they captured that value? So, because I'm excited to turn it over to the conversation with Jean, let me quickly kind of wrap up a few takeaways on milestones. I've also written a much longer post, which we'll share out after, and you can find it on our blog. And then, we're very happy to take you through. And if you want to work through building your milestones, we are actually working on a workshop that will specifically help with that. But a few takeaways to leave you with before I bring Jean up. The first one is just, the way to think about milestones. Milestones are to PLG as sales stages are to enterprise sales. There's some differences, they're important, but fundamentally that's kind of a simple rule of thumb. The second one, and this is a rule always, if you're building your milestones, just don't boil the ocean. I have the same advice for folks who are getting their product instrumented and events up for the first time and trying to use Variance. Just don't try to boil the ocean. You don't need to. You're much better off with an iterative approach where you start and you get the basic things that you need and you build them from there. Third one is just, the way to think about milestones. You have actions, filters, thresholds, and time windows. A milestone will have to have at least 2 of those, the actions and the threshold, and can have all 4. This next one really about the difference. So onboarded should capture the basic requirements of using the product. I think onboarded and PQL are 2 milestones you'll definitely want to have. And the difference there is one is about just can they use the product. The second one is are they seeing value in it, right? And are they highly likely to convert? And then finally, and this one is one I hope to have some time to talk to Jean about because I know she has some interesting perspectives here. Is one of the questions we get is what about health? And so, churn risk, and should that be included in milestones? And my answer is no. I think fundamentally milestones are a way to look at life cycle and journey. And health is a different question. You can capture them using the same tools. So in Variance, you can start to capture those same health questions. But how you handle them and whether they're a milestone, I think is a different issue. So with that, I am going to stop sharing, and then I'm going to ask James to hopefully help me bring Jean up.
Hi, Noah.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm good. Sorry. 1 second. I'm having, there you go. Awesome. Thank you so much. This is Jean Lethuillier. Is that reasonable?
It's reasonable. As I said, I don't even know how to pronounce my last name, so we're good.
So Jean is the Chief Customer Officer at Alma. And maybe you could just talk quickly about what Alma is and what you're doing there.
Sure. So I joined Alma a few months ago. Alma is a Slack native workflow management tool that helps team orchestrate and collaborate across the unexpected and most stressful events during your workday. So the moments that knock you off your radar, your wavelength, your to-do list. That can be technical incidents, it can be customer escalations, messy product launches, anything you can really think of. As it relates to customer success, since we're grounded in a product-led growth model, the customer journey milestone has to be an equal balance between a per user experience and a per account adoption. So in my role currently, I oversee the full customer journey, looking from acquisition all the way up to retention and expansion and reach.
So I have lots of things that I'm hoping to talk to you about, but let's maybe start by your journey at Alma coming in and needing to answer the question of what are the milestones, and maybe just talk about kind of how you went through that process, because I think it really seemed like you took a sort of really smart approach to trying to answer that question that everybody has to answer.
Yeah, so I mean, Alma is just starting out in our early product design phase. We have a bunch of really happy and loyal customers, and that's what drew me to join Alma, is the value proposition that customers were telling me about and I could experience. I entered in and I said, great, who are our happy customers? And I just, there were many records of where our customers are, what their use cases are, but the consolidation and understanding the customer heat map was something that I believe every CS leader and CSM would like to know in order to better manage their book of business. So when I entered in, I said, okay, let's start talking to customers. And I think that is something that I always have to remind myself stepping into the first role. It's so easy to be drawn into, let's start building, but starting from the source has been the most useful. So speaking to our customers, understanding how they found Alma to start with, what their period in adoption was, what was their aha moment, like you said, Noah, really helped me in understanding where our customers are standing, what their current journey is currently with Alma, and starting to place them in these milestones.
And so, you actually built your sort of milestones out, and I know you've been adapting them, but maybe can you explain how you made your decision for your, whatever you want to call it, a V1, V.1 your milestones?
Yeah, so to just rewinding a little bit, I started as a consultant for many companies trying to stand up their customer success practices in the Asia Pacific market. And what I've learned in those days is that there is not the one incorrect way is by cookie cutting the customer milestone and journey. So like I said, I started with the customer, and I really try to understand what they went through, what they're going through, and also understanding, keeping in mind that the market will change, the product will change, and our customer base will evolve. So I didn't try to go in and say, let's make the perfect customer journey. Instead, I took a look at where Alma is today, and we secured the following stages. So right now we have what we're calling first touch. Because Alma has a free forever plan, that first touch is when a user can install it. And Noah, that relates to the onboarding. They can use the product, but then they haven't reached that aha moment. So the aha moment actually is reached in the assessment phase, in the assessment milestone. And that's when we start to look at their behaviors. Are they inviting additional users? Are they going into the web application and tinkering with the settings? The real aha moment happens is when they do invite these users, they start a test incident to test out the workflow, and you can see all these exchanges being happen. And whenever I see that variance notification pop up for the individuals in my onboarding assessment phase, I get really excited because I know that the adoption will happen very quickly after that. And that's when they go into the adoption phase, where they have a lot of, you can see them looking at our knowledge base articles. You can see them asking questions in our Slack Connect channels. So you're able to detect that they're in adoption phase, but the customer, they don't know that themselves. There is no human handoff. And I think that's very important to point out, because as I'm building this, I always want to remember, these are not stages. These are not sales stages. There is not that human handoff. We don't want that friction point. We want the customer just to travel back and forth between the journey. So once they reach adoption, they fall into a steady passive state where we can see they have a usage of the product. And then sometimes they do go into a block stage, so they can be between a steady passive state versus a block state.
That's awesome. Yeah, and one of the things, especially like I think in a lot of organizations, CSMs are typically kind of only post sales, and you're obviously overseeing the whole thing here. And so maybe can you talk about, like, you have your steady versus block, but what I was talking about, where you have this difference between what is the health of a customer and what is their milestone, and maybe talk about how you see those connecting and what makes them different.
Yes, so I see that customer health and customer milestones are partnering in crime. It's not one or the other, because how I see it is that customer health tells me that an action needs to be taken. It doesn't tell me what that action can be unless I look at which part of the journey the customer is on. Say, for example, if the customer has not reached their aha moment in the assessment phase, and their health is in red, I am not going to go in there and say, hey, can you tell me about the past 10 months and have a case study? Instead, I'm going to go in there and I'm going to try to understand, where are they getting stuck? Is there a particular page in our setting that they're tinkering with for the last 3 days? Maybe it's an integration that they're trying to figure out. So that's how I see customer health and customer milestones. One tells me to take an action. The other one is my actual call to action.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it's a super helpful distinction. I think, again, in the sort of desire that I've seen, a lot of people have a desire to boil the ocean with problems like this. And so then when you run into that part of your milestones and you want to sort of set all the states that they could possibly be in as milestones. And I think it's much easier to think in the way you're thinking, which is, you have this set of, what is their health, and those are states, and then you have your milestones, and within any milestone they can have a different health. They're not, they're again, like you said, partners in crime. So one last thing, we have a couple minutes. Can you talk a little, your story of digging into the data, really resonated with me. when you talked about kind of how you made the decision on the actual behaviors and product actions you wanted to choose, and how you even found by digging into the data, maybe some sort of counterintuitive stuff where, you know, you had initially thought that, you know, the action you'd be looking for from one stage to the next would be this, but when you actually look deeper, and, you know, I just thought it was a sort of really interesting approach.
Sure. So I would say that, so there are some facts that I knew that were floating around. Like I said, when I entered, I knew there are happy customers, loyal customers, but why? That was like a big question mark for me. And yes, the customer conversation does help. But also there's just this missing gray areas, like, but what is it that they're doing? So what I did know going into this was Alma has a strong adoption path. When somehow, somewhere, someone installs Alma, within the first 60 days, Alma reaches 50% of a company. That's what I knew. But again, I didn't know the depth of it. I don't understand what the aha moment is. So what I did was I began to just shift through the data points that we have. And I mean, I'm not trying to like, to say it just because you're on the other end, Noah, but I really dug into Variance to look at, okay, during the first 60 days, what did they do? What was that aha moment? I went in there with a lot of biases. I was thinking, okay, maybe the aha moment is just when they start to like test it out themselves. Or it's because, I don't know, they read a document somewhere. But then I realized the trend was that it was the moment that they went in there, I started inviting people. So for me, the first 60 days was already great, but how can we make that 60 days 30 days? And that to me was a leading indicator that, hey, if we can get these people to their aha moment quicker by having them invite their friends to a test incident, then that aha moment can actually happen faster, and a 50% reach can happen maybe in 30 days. Who knows? I'm still testing.
Yeah, I think that's awesome, and you know, the ability, I've seen a lot. I think there's a desire to sort of like jump up and just program in your sort of most complicated assumptions, but also sometimes when you just dig in deeper, you find out it's sometimes even simpler. You know, it's simpler than you originally thought, right? And
Exactly.
And, you know, especially when you're dealing with this data, you're having it come in real time. I think that's particularly important. Well, Jean, thank you so much for joining us. Everybody else on the video, we really appreciate your time. As always, if you have any questions, you know where to find us. I'm noah@variance.com. Just come to Variance. We have a contact form. If anybody wants to try it out, or anybody wants to walk through a milestone workshop, we're happy to do that with them. And we really appreciate everybody's time. Have a great day.
Thank you.